All right. This is now being recorded, so everything you say can and will be used against you. That's your dark, not necessarily in court of law. Yeah, and it's now nice and dark, so stay pretty good now. Yes, sir.
Tell me about that. That logo there.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. That's my latest iteration of playing around with AI. I've got some other stuff in here too that I've been playing with. Yeah, that one came out pretty nice. It looks like a sticker. And yeah, it's actually spelled correctly. The only thing it's missing is coffee and donuts. But other than that.
Tell us about that fabulous tower. I want one on our property.
Yeah, that's pretty nice looking.
That's what we're gonna put out, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just like that, only maybe different. But that one, yeah, I just recently started playing around with Meta's AI. Meta is the parent company of Facebook. And you can tell because they forced me to, I could take this out, but anyway, there's the watermark to show where it came from. But yeah, Meta's got some pretty cool stuff. I've tried Google, I've tried Microsoft, and a couple others, Canva, and every one of those cannot spell things. It's always munging things. It'll leave a letter out. It'll transpose things. It'll use some kind of odd alien character set. I don't know why they do that, but it makes me crazy. Even if you say, please make sure to spell and put it in quotes correctly, it still won't do it. It's like a little kid. Anyway, okay. Yeah, my clicker's not working. There we go. All right, so just a couple of things before we get into the meat of things. So again, I've been playing around. I know Microsoft the best because I do a lot of work with Microsoft. So this is why I fed into it. Create an image that represents a Pi-Star amateur radio hotspot, Shark RF open spot hotspot, and an amateur radio handheld radio. Fairly, scripted.
Oh my God.
I like your shark. Yeah, it's got the shark in there. I don't know what this guy's doing. He's shark hunting, maybe? I don't know. This is some kind of a weird radio with a DIN connector. And I don't know why we've got, I don't know what that is, like a rocket or something. I don't know, seashell. And then this thing, I guess, is supposed to be the hotspot. But yeah, it's peep and spot.
So the open spot.
And yeah, so there's some work to be done there. Did get some nice surface mount componentry in there. And it remotely looks like a Raspberry Pi. So anyway, so then here's another one, another couple actually. So here we've got, it looks like some kind of weird phone with a couple of antenna, and then I don't know what this thing is. This is supposedly the Pi-Star hotspot. Obviously, it's not actually going out to the web and actually finding out what a Pi-Star actually is. It's just sort of making stuff up, right? Hallucinations, as they call them. And there's another one. It actually did get a Raspberry Pi in here, which is more or less close, except for the Raspberry Pi doesn't have an antenna on it. But anyway,
What's that thing at the top?
I don't know what that.
Looks like the cruise control.
I know, right? Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
It's a shark.
Yeah, yeah, and then a shark or whatever that is. I don't know. Anyway, so I keep having fun with that. All right, so I'm going to run through just a quick history of, because I found this really interesting, a history of amateur radio digital modes. And then we're going to go into a few of the popular digital modes. I'm going to start with HF modes, some of the more or less well-known ones, and then I'm going to end up by talking about, the VHF, UHF modes like DMR and Y7 and so on.
Oh,
So teletype. This is the machine I learned to program on in 1979. Not the actual machine, but yeah, one of those teletypes, man.
Model 15.
Yeah, the one I learned on was a Model 33, but anyway. But yeah, this was really the kind of the start, well, actually, so what was the very first digital mode? Morse code. I think it's because you're using your digits. I don't know. But yeah, most people consider that the first digital mode. Anyway, so in the 1940s, some hams decided, hey, it would be cool. We've got these teletypes now. We can connect to them electrically. So how can we use those to communicate over there? And so that was really the birth of a couple of modes, frequency shift key modulation, also known as audio FSK, which is the same thing, only using audio tones. And then basically the way FSK is very simple, right? It just uses a frequency to indicate 0 or 1, right? A space or a mark as it's called. And it's still in common use today. If you use RTTY, it's still using AFSK or BPSK, which is a binary version of it. Nice thing about FSK is it's very, very bandwidth friendly. It only requires 250 hertz of bandwidth. It's only 45 baud. Everybody know what a baud is? Baud. It's called a symbol rate. Excuse me, a symbol rate. So in other words, 45 symbols per second. Right. So that's what it is. And a symbol is like a character. Right. Not to be confused with bits per second or bytes per second, right? Which bits are what make up a character, typically 10 bits to a character, right? And a byte is, of course, similar, right? That's what 10 bits is typically. Some people think 8 bits is a byte, but when you're using communications, you have 2 extra bits for error checking and parity and things like that. Anyway, okay. Market space frequencies 2125 and 2295 respectively. And later on, they came up with 50 and 75 baud versions. Woo, yeah. I know when I was using these, we were running these over 110 baud modem. And you needed like to be wearing headphones because they were so loud and so slow. But anyway. Okay. So the big downside of RTTY was there was no error checking, right? So any sort of interference, QRM, QRN, any of that could really interfere with it. And that continues today as well. Excuse me. And I've listed the common frequencies. You know, when I first started playing around with RTTY, I didn't know where to tune. You know, and it's not well documented for whatever reason. So yeah, so here's a list of the common frequency allocations. Typically, they're toward the bottom end of the band. This is true of most digital modes. You know, you'll find CW and you'll find most of the digital modes down there in the lower end of the bands. So here's an example of RTTY. So this particular application is called FLDigi. How many people have used FLDigi? 2. Okay. FLDigi is free. It's part of the same suite. Have you ever used FLRig? Anyone? Thing too. FLRig is pretty cool because it will control rigs for you and you can interface it with applications. So that you can, and it allows you to do like remote control of the rig. A common example, I use it with FT8 and I have WSJT-X. When you specify the radio type, you can, one of the options is FLRig. Then you go into FLRig, you install it, you tell it what rig you have, and then it gives you a nice little graphical interface where you can adjust the frequency, the power levels, squelch, all that kind of stuff, filters. And so if you're running remotely, which I often do, because I don't like to spend time in my basement with spiders, you know, I'll remote into a PC that's direct connected and it's running FLRig. And so I can change all of those things without having to get out of my chair, just go down to the basement. So anyway, same guy that created FLRig, created FLDigi, created FLRig. This is FLDigi. FLDigi is cool because it supports, I don't know, 20 different digital protocols. So RTTY, we'll talk about these, BPSK, Olivia, a bunch of these different, and it's all built into this one application. What you see here on the left, on the left side is where you can type in your inputs, right? So if you want to send something. So RTTY and most of these protocols we're talking about now are for keyboard to keyboard communication, right? So just envision, you know, 2 people on teletypes typing to each other, except for now we're all running Windows or Mac PCs instead, or, you know, iPads for that matter. Then on the right is the interpretation. Now this one's kind of messy, and this is not too unusual because you get a lot of QRM and QRN that it's picking up and trying to translate. So that's what this garbage is up here. But now all of a sudden you see CQDX, CQDX. So that looks very much like, you know, like a CW or any other type of a CQ. So he's got his call sign. You notice the first one was F6I, so that one dropped out, but he said it 3 times, so you finally get F61JT, which would be France, if memory serves. and then, PSEK, just like you would do in CW. And then you would come back, come back over here and you would type in what you want to, how you want to respond. And that's how the whole QSO goes. So very similar to a CW QSO, except for your typing, and you're obviously not using Morse code. And then down at the bottom, this band scope shows, so it's tuned to 28.120. And so then this shows all of the various activity in this particular area that you're tuned. And so the vertical bars typically indicate somebody that's transmitting. Right, so if you're hunting for somebody that you want to talk to, you would find one of these and you would just double click on it, which would then tune to that particular thing and start to interpret it. So pretty straightforward. If you want a CQ, you would do the opposite. You would find an empty spot, double click on that, and you start typing CQ. And then somebody else would see your vertical bar and click on it. So it's pretty straightforward, not too bad. Okay. So how many folks here have used packet radio? A few more. Packet radio, yeah, it started in around 1978. It was one of the first true digital nodes in that it has things like error correction and things like that built into it. It was originally used, so you can use packet radio just like you can with RTTY, for computer to computer communication, just like over the keyboard. But its more popular use, especially in the 1980s, was for like a bulletin board systems, right? So if you ever were part of that BBS culture, I had one back in the day. And so you could do a BBS over the air. And some of these still exist. Like Denver Radio Club has one. They have a packet radio somewhere here in Lakewood that's got a BBS attached to it. So you can still do that.
When I first started with packet, it was only 2 meters.
Yeah, when a lot of folks first started with packet, it was only 2 meters, right? Yeah. And now there's some HF, usually it's like 6 meters where you'll see it. And the way it works, it groups data into packets of 10 to 100 bytes. It has this protocol called AX25, which if you're familiar with X25, the A just stands for amateur. So it was an amateur radio derivative of X25, which is a very common communications protocol. Support speeds of 300 baud or BPS. That tends to be kind of interchangeable on HF, and 1200 to 9600 on VHF and UHF. I already talked about that. One of the reasons they needed to modify X25 is because of FCC requirements. We have to have our call sign sent. That way you don't have to manually, do that. So if you're using packet radio, you don't have to worry about self-identifying because your call sign is going out with every packet that you send. Now, the downside of it originally was that because we didn't have computers that were powerful enough, my thing just died. Yeah. Stand by. Technical difficulties. Get another battery. Okay. Yeah, because we didn't have computers that were powerful enough to do all the interpretation required, you had to buy a piece of hardware called a terminal node controller, a TNC. And you still buy these. They're very expensive back in the day, like $1,000 kind of expensive. Today, PCs can act as a TNC, and so you can basically, connect your radio directly to your PC, and the PC can do all that work for you. You can also buy an external sound card like a Signal Link, which will also, provide. That's more to provide the connection between your PC and your radio if it doesn't have a USB interface. Then came PSK, or excuse me, phase shift. I think it's phase shift key. And improved by using 180-degree phase shifts, much more efficient. It was much more tolerant to noise, and it was very good at low power levels. It's also slow though, 31 baud or 31 BPS. They do have newer versions like PSK 63. You can probably guess what the 63 stands for. 63 volts per second, yeah. Again, this looks very similar to any other waterfall, but this is an actual PSK 31 waterfall, showing multiple QSOs going on. Okay, on the right is an example PSK 31 QSO. This is with a different software package as part of Ham Radio Deluxe. So if you, by the way, if you have Ham Radio Deluxe, it also has an application in there that's got all these digital modes built into it as well. So in this case, it's tuned to 14070, which is obviously the 20-meter frequency. This one, there's not a lot going on. That's part of the challenge with a lot of these digital modes nowadays that aren't FT8. There's just not a lot of activity unless there's a contest going on or something like that. I think there's RTTY contests and so on, and you'll find a lot of activity. But in this case, yeah, here's the there's the waterfall, and it's very similar. You've got a place where you can send and a place where it's decoding the incoming. And so there's all of the popular frequencies. And then improving on PSK 31 is multiple frequency shift key, or MFSK, that use more than 2 frequencies. Some of them use as many as 4. And those are protocols like WSJT-X and Olivia that use those. I have not played with Olivia, but you're ever use that? I keep seeing it, hearing about it, but I've never played with it. Okay, so then the next kind of evolution was people say, oh, there's this thing called the internet, right? And now we can communicate with each other over this new thing called the internet. And so initially, it started in the 1980s. This was getting right around the birth of the internet, where folks using packet radio said, hey, you know, we can start sending messages to each other kind of asynchronously. In other words, instead of keyboard to keyboard, it's more of a store and forward kind of thing. Right? And so that's kind of how it evolved, and kind of the general email evolved in a parallel track. Like if you guys were around back in the days when AOL first started, there used to be a service called The Source. Everybody used that. Really dating myself, but yeah, and those all had their own email systems, but they were locked, they were closed. So you could only communicate with other people within the same system. And that was kind of the way it had started. You know, the bulletin board system started supporting email, but only within their own kind of domain, if you will. But then all of a sudden they said, hey, now we've got the internet. And so we can send stuff from one system to another over this thing called the internet. And so that kind of caused a shift in the architecture. And this became a thing called WinLink, which serves today. We'll talk more about that in a minute. NetLink was kind of the other piece of WinLink. So think of WinLink kind of as the client, or as the application you use for communication, kind of like Outlook today. And then underneath it, you had NetLink. And NetLink was the interface that provided, you know, all the other guts that were needed to communicate outward. Excuse me. And that interface with like these VHF packet systems. And so it became known as WinLink with NetLink. So keep that in mind, because that's very, very similar to the way it works today. You need 2 pieces. You need a client computer piece, WinLink, and then you need something underneath it to do the TNC, or the, you know, the actual digital communications. So in 2000, WinLink 2000, which came out in 1999, enabled full internet-based email. So over HF, VHF, UHF, coupled with the new software-based TNC. So that kind of democratized a lot of this process, right? Because now all of a sudden you don't need to spend $1,000 on a TNC. You can install a piece of software and get it up and running. Now, when I say simplified, I'm talking kind of relatively, because it's still not easy. Even today, it's not the easiest thing to get running, but better than, you know, the alternative, I guess.
Mark?
Yes.
When you say internet-based email, it's like you were going over the internet, but you're actually doing HF?
Well, it's both, right? So you're going over HF to a server, and that server can either send, and I'll get into that when I get further into WinLink. I always do this when I talk too much, but yeah, so WinLink has its own internal email server. So if you have another user on WinLink, you can communicate to each other. You don't need the internet for that. It's all going over HF, VHF, whatever. But you can also communicate from WinLink email address to a regular internet, like a Gmail. So you can do both. But radio is the medium for transmitting. Until it gets to the server and it's going to be obviously. Okay, another big development happened. This took 10 years for the FCC to do it. There used to be a 300 baud symbol rate, which severely limited what these systems can do. If you think about it today, I got my house, I have 600 megabits. How many times, how many orders of magnitude is 300 baud to 600,000, right? And so they removed that, which was sort of an artificial limitation because they were just worried about bandwidth. Took the ARL 20 years to get the FCC to finally remove that limitation. And so now you can do 2.8 kilohertz, which would be approximately 2,000 baud. Still not very fast. Think about the days when you had a 9600 baud modem. So it's a fraction of that. So it's still not great, but you know, it works. Yeah, and this is really funny. Maximum message size of 120 kilobytes. So do the math. Yeah, 2,000 baud sending 120,000 bytes. I mean, we're talking hours, maybe days to send a message that big. That's assuming it even gets through because, you know, conditions and all that. So, yeah. All right, so here's an example of WinLink session. So this is the actual component that sits under WinLink and does the communication across to your radio and then to the other side. So you've got some really cool dials here showing you like the CPU of your computer and, you know, the AFC levels and all that kind of stuff. Excuse me. Here's the folders. This should look kind of familiar to anybody who uses
Yeah. Thanks, sir. Yeah, I keep shocking things, and I probably just shocked this thing. It lost its mind temporarily. Okay, so very much if you're open, all you need is a radio license. They do the connection between your radio and, which I'll get into that architecture in a second here, and these talk groups. So these talk groups are, they're kind of like a channel. They typically have a description. It could be geography, like there's a worldwide channel, which everybody can get into. There's North America, there's Colorado, there's Denver, and there's also specific interest groups. You name it. Now we have one now. Like that. But a lot of clubs have their own talk groups. You name it, they're out there. There's thousands and thousands of these talk groups. So like you're telling me you're wondering about why you don't ever hear anything on DMR. It's because the local repeaters here, which are mostly owned by R&M, are not connected to any of these talk groups that the rest of the world are using. I'll get more into that. All right, so yeah, again, so R&M is a DMR network. You can use your radios. They've got repeaters all over Colorado. Got a slide coming up on it, but they're not connected outside of their network. So you can only talk to other people that are connecting into their network through their repeaters. No way to get into it from the internet. I need a clip over here again. This is the Brandmeister dashboard, and this just gives you an idea of how many people are using DMR over the internet. 7,282 repeaters. Think about that. That's a lot. And these are actual honest to God repeaters. These are not hotspots. There are almost 20,000 hotspots, including one of those is mine. And you have a good point. Masters are the actual servers that are shepherding all the communications between the various regions. And at this point, this was late at night, but at this point, there were 26 voice calls happening at the same time. And it has this cool map that shows the countries that are currently active, where people are actually talking. If we have time, which we probably will, I'll give you a demo of the Brandmeister dashboard. I have a live version of it running. But anyway, so this just gives you an idea of just how busy this is. The RTTY, so as I mentioned, they built this incredible network. The real notion behind RTTY was to provide a network which is digital, but it's mainly for like disaster, emergency communications, backup, all that sort of thing. Was really not designed for people to be doing QSOs on. In fact, I think they kind of frown on it. You never hear any traffic on these top groups. But anyway, here's a map of all the repeaters. So they've got obviously a whole bunch in Colorado. They've got a big chunk of the state cover. They're branching out into New Mexico. They've actually are bringing one up in Kansas too. So it's growing. So it's kind of cool that way. They do have a system-wide talk group. We'll talk about talk groups more in a second here, which is 700 talk group number. Every talk group has a number. And then they have a whole bunch of regional, local talk groups and so on. The repeaters are all interconnected, typically via the internet. Some of them are microwave connected. Some of them have both, again, for disaster reasons. And yeah, that's about it.
With the hotspot or not?
You cannot access anyone with a hotspot, yeah, because none of these are internet connected. Okay, so only over the air can be used. Yeah, that said, they have plenty of repeaters. You just never hear anybody talking on them. They only support voice QSOs. So one of the things about DMR is you can do not only voice, but you can send data. You can send text. You can send APRS over it. They don't allow any of that. So it's just for voice. Yeah, and there's the link if you want to look at their flow network. So I mean, I keep it programmed in my radios. like when I'm traveling around the state, if you get stuck somewhere, you're probably within range of one of their repeaters that you could call for help, that kind of thing. It's nice. Skydive is the same way. Okay, let's talk a little bit about configuring DMR radios. When I first started with my tech license, one of the first things I did is I bought a DMR radio. I bought the Baofeng DM1701, which was just incredibly difficult. I can't explain how much time, and I'm a computer guy, right? I got a computer science degree and 40 years of experience. It took me over a week to figure out how to get this thing to work. Partly because I didn't know about hotspots yet, but also because, again, there's almost no activity on the local repeaters. So it's very frustrating. That said, I'm going to make it easier for you. So the basics are, first of all, just like any repeater, you need to know the frequency it's using in the shift. And they're very typical, it's -5 megahertz on UHF, minus 0.6 on VHF. That's all documented in the repeater book and so on. Where it starts to get a little weird is you have to know a color code and a time slot. So let me describe what that means. Time slot's pretty straightforward. The DMR protocol uses time to be TDMA multiplexing, which means that you can have two QSOs going on any repeater at the same time. So that's pretty cool. So you can do two instead of just one. That's called a time slot. So it's either time slot 1 or time slot 2. And they will document typically what use that they intend for each time slot. I'll show you a shot from the repeater book in a second, which will explain this a little bit better. Yes, sir. Yeah, it's, so the question comment was, it's very much like TDMA, where time slot 1 is like transmitting on the even microseconds or whatever it is. I don't know how we split it up. And then time slot 2 would be on and off, right? And so that's how it's just constantly alternating between the two. And because it's doing it so fast, you don't ever notice any kind of delay. But yeah, that's how we squeeze 2 QSOs into one piece of bandwidth. So yeah, very similar to the early cell phones. They used to use them. Not anymore, but they used to. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Color code it was back in the public service days. The idea there was, so say that I'm connected to time slot 1, we could have 8 color codes because they didn't have, any notion of a talk group like we do. Right, so color code 1 might be for general communications, color code 2 might be for SWAT. You get the idea, right? It's like channels. Well, today we don't use those in amateur radio for anything other than because the repeater requires to be on a specific color code. It never changes. You just need to know what the number is. And I'll show you in a minute what that looks like in the repeater book or whatever. So color codes are 1 to 11, time slots are 1 or 2. Okay. Yeah, repeater book lists all of that. And then the only other thing you need to then know, so once you've got that connection for the repeater put in, so frequency, offset, color code, time slot, then you just need to figure out which talk group you want to go to. Talk about that in a second. So it's the combination of all this stuff. It's called the code plug. If you ever hear that term, code plug, all it is just about 5 parameters that you need to put into your radio to communicate over the beam.
It comes from plug these that pre-program the plug, then you stick it in the radio, program to the radio.
You're saying,
So then you can program multiple radios using the same little bar. That's how they'll.
oh yeah. So that dates back to actually a physical plug that you could, when you had, say you had 1,000 radios you had to program. It was a physical that you could plug into the radio and suck the configuration into it, so you didn't have to do it manually every time. Today, what they've done is software called CPS, which I'll get into in a second, which guess what? Code plug software, that's what that stands for. So it's a software code plug. But yeah, great point historically. Okay. So here's an example. This is right out of repeater book for the KV0 VGD, repeater up in golden, and here's your typical downlink, uplink, and offset. Color code 2, so you need that first of all. Okay, color code 2, ready to go. Then you go down here, it describes what the various time slots do. So again, remember, there's 2 of them. And so what the repeaters will typically do is they will split various talk groups into the 2 time slots. So these are all pretty much local or within their network. So in this case, so if you configure it for time slot 2 and you connect to this talk group 3108, that's for all of Colorado, 3171 is northern Colorado, and so on. And so if you're communicating to a local repeater and you just want to do a QSO to see if it's working, you would set this thing for time slot 2, 3108, and then you could talk to anybody in Colorado. By the way, 3108, this is all Brandmeister. So that means that if you're going to go over this and talk on 3108 on this repeater, anybody in Colorado or anyone in the world literally that's listening in on talk group 3108 will hear you. Kind of cool. Okay. Also, if you look down here at the bottom, there's all kinds of other stuff too, but basically all other talk group connections will be directed to time slot 1. So if you want to use a talk group that is not listed here, not all repeaters support this. Sometimes they call it steering. You can configure the repeater to connect to another talk group that's not defaulted here. Okay, so what they're telling you here is you just need to use time slot 1.
Yeah.
These are high-star hotspots. Inside this is a Raspberry Pi. These are freebie Raspberry Pi freebies. You can run them on the cheapest Raspberry Pi made, which is the 0W, which runs about $50. And then plug into the Raspberry Pi is a little they call a hot. It's just a module to plug into the pins on the Raspberry Pi, which gives you this antenna and the ability to take the signal coming in from the radio, convert it into something the Pi starter can use, and then send out on the so I have an EMR hotspot, and I have a YSF hotspot. Exactly the same hardware, exactly the same software. That's one's configured for EMR, and the other is configured for YSF. You cannot have them, even though it will allow you to select two protocols in PyStar, it doesn't work. I don't know why they don't disable that. You have to have separate hotspots. But again, these are all under $100. But yeah, so it's not a big deal. More on other ones in a second here. So what is a hotspot? Again, it's a small device like that, that when I key up on my radio, so I still have radio, I still have a radio here. It's going over the radio links to this. So whenever I talk, it's just transmitting, whichever, in this case, this is an AC radio, so it's transmitting whatever room I want to talk to. Across to my ID and stuff, across to the hotspot, and then converts it into digital and sends it across. So in this case, it's going to send it across to whatever it's configured to talk to. Same thing on the DMR side. The way it's connecting to the internet is this has Wi-Fi. So it's connected right now, actually through my phone, which is a hotspot. Different kind of hotspot. That can use something. You have Wi-Fi hotspots and you have radio hotspots. Two different things. One gets into the internet, and the other one lets your radio talk to you. So very similar to a repeater. These are basically little digital repeaters. Except for they're only 100 milliwatts. That doesn't sound like a lot, but you know what? With the right antenna, I've got 5 to 10 miles out of 100 milliwatts on digital. I'll connect one of these to my J-pole on the roof, and I live over by elementary school. I've heard myself up on the hill on 470 east of Santa Fe. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how far they can go. And it's nice too, because you can just stroll around your neighborhood, it'll hook rubber duck you. Use it. Okay, most of the Wi-Fi, or most of the hotspots communicate via Wi-Fi. You get like this particular Raspberry Pi also has Ethernet, so you can connect it on one too. No particular reason for doing that. Most hotspots support all of the protocols. So, like PyStar, for example, I can use any of my radios, but you just have to have it configured for that specific protocol on a specific frequency. Here's some shots on the right there of the, of the various hotspots. So, I'll talk about these in a second. Also, can do cross protocol conversion. So, in other words, like the last couple of weeks, I've been using my AC radio through my hotspot to talk on the club DMR channel. And it's actually fairly simple to do. You can go into configuration. There's a specific mode called YSF2 DMR. You select that, and you give it the usual stuff. Top group number that you want to connect to, and it does that translation transparently for you. So when you key up on that radio, it just shows up on the club's DMR channel. Pretty cool stuff. The only caveat that I've run into is D-Star, where because they have a proprietary protocol, I can talk to D-Star reflectors through PyStar, but there's a couple limitations. Like certain kinds of reflectors don't work. Anyways, because they have paid for a license to use it. Okay, so the question was, is 100 milliwatts the limitation by the radio dot? I think it is. No. It's not actually any limitation other than the fact that probably keep the cost down for one, because those little shields are That's what everyone calls you plug in, are like $40. So, and plus, like I said, you get probably enough range out of that power level, but there's no reason why you couldn't connect that to a later amplifier. I don't know how much, I don't know how much output power you get from 100 milliwatts, but it's certainly more than 100 milliwatts. Danny, you have something?
Just saying that you have one of the dongles in the codec for
I don't, yeah, so there are dongles.
USB dongle that does the.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and if you buy the open stock for Pro, it has the full icon. But, you know, again, that's only for that edge use case where you have an icon radio, you want it full, like, you know, I have 705, and I connected to the 5-star. To instruct it, so. And you right here, what's that? The Pro is they're expensive. Okay, so primary types, I talked about the PyStar. So PyStar is all open source. It's developed by a bunch of hands. They don't charge for it. You just download it. You buy yourself a Raspberry Pi. You stick the SD card into the Pi and it boots up running PyStar. You just have to configure it ahead of time with the hotspot, your Wi-Fi hotspot, so you can get to the internet. Once it's done that, all the configuration, you can see the shot here. All the configuration is just done over the web. That's true for all the hotspots, by the way. They're all just web-based configurations, so you just need to know, you know, you go to web IP address or whatever, those need to put in your web router to the hotspot. Let's see, yeah, so you install it on the Raspberry Pi, you configure it, and put it off and running. There's really nothing involved, hardware-wise, outside of just plugging in that shield or hat into the top of the Raspberry Pi. And you can buy those. This is the small one. You can buy these kits off of like eBay or Alibaba for $30-40, and then you have a Raspberry Pi to you're done. Well, I don't even include cakes. Let's see. Then there's the Zoom video, Zoom Spot. This is the only hotspot I believe currently that HRO sells. Probably because first of all, the 5-star is all kind of DIY anyway. And Sharpfire likes pretty much sells direct. But anyway, it's based on PyStar. This is the Zoom Spot here. But the benefit of that, you can just put on the current file. Putting it together and installing Linux and all that stuff. And then you got the open spot. That's the Cadillac. It's the most user friendly. They're tiny little things, you know, like the size of one of the deck cards. A lot of them have built-in battery, so you can use it mobile, just power it up, or use your phone as a hotspot. It's very easy to configure. John sent me some. John's got, he sent me installation instructions. Or rather, configuration instructions. To use the hotspot, it's very trivial.
Also use PyStar.
Yeah, it's using PyStar. No. It's their own code.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's still web-based, like.
I'm just gonna say the first week that we connected with a DMR, I was out of town down in Florida, away from my QTH down there. And was at a hotel and literally used the open spot with a built-in battery just to connect to the iPhone with my handheld, my Anytone, and was able to connect to the net from there. So it just made it really easy to be portable. Yeah, I started to do that as well. It's a little trickier. Like I configured these ahead of time to use the bridge or the church's Wi-Fi, and for whatever reason it wouldn't connect. But I did have it already programmed to use my hotspot and found that, so started using it. I have noticed, I don't know about the open spot, but 5-stars, when you get in a situation where your phone's internet connection gets a little dodgy, like I know using it on Eastern I-70, I used to use it going to Missouri, I'm taking my daughter to college, and when we get out of those little fringe areas, it just became useless. Which makes sense, it's probably the same as any other hotspot, but you don't have an internet connection, you're pretty much just talking to yourself. But anyway, but I think the open spot just makes it much easier. Okay. Oh, yeah, if you do get one, the one thing you need to configure is the frequency that the hotspot's going to use. And for years, there was no guidance, so I just picked some random simplex frequency. Finally, the CCR came out with a list of guidelines, and here's the rest. Basically, there's like 10 different channels that you can choose from, they're all UHF simplex solutions. Mine is set for, I actually have right here, 438 by 75, is my stuff.
Oh, did you see that, did you post that about the frequency that was being jammed on? UHF simplex?
Yeah.
It's off now.
Yeah. You know, we talked about that at the very beginning. Yeah, I was in the 438. Yeah, it's gone. Okay, so just to finish up some additional, and all these links, this deck's already up on the website, by the way. But yeah, here's an example of a PyStar kit. This one happens to be up on Amazon, you buy them even cheaper, and you get it out of Baba, and then of course it's kind of a crapshoot. It's what you're gonna get, if it actually works or not. You need a Raspberry Pi Zero W, which is $15, or you can go to the faster one. Sharpfire open spot runs from $220 to $308. You price that on euros, and if the dollar dropping in value, that's probably going to be going up in price. Well, yes. And then the Zoom spot's kind of squarely in the middle there between 175 and 250, depending on the model you get. And then I put my look at PyStar software. So there. Here's the DMR link, so if you want to check out Brandmeister and that free software firmware. And I haven't talked about mesh networks. That came up on the tech deck last week, and Jonathan brought it up, and I was like, I don't know about it. So I did a little bit more research. There's some slides